Such an honor to have you with us for this informal dialogue with our council colleagues. I don't think I need to say much about your trajectory because it's so outstanding. Such an honor to be seated next to you as the longest serving woman on the Senate. It's just extraordinary, and just now appointed to the Senate Appropriations Committee, which it's so important to us, of course, and so I'm just going to open it right up to you to share with us, of course, some of these very looming, pressing issues that I know you're out there fighting for, and I can only tell you that here in Maryland we feel very good and very confident because we know that all these issues are in good hands with you. So I appreciate you taking the time.
I'm going to congratulate you on your election and selection as council president, and know that you are the first Latina to hold this position, not only in the county, but as I looked around in local government within our state. And so we congratulate you on breaking that barrier. But I know how I felt as the first. You don't want to be the first and the only. You want to be the first of many, which again is the empowerment of grassroots organizations. And so many of us came up through the civic groups. I'm really glad to be here today. You know, I started my career as a member of the Baltimore City Council, so I feel very close to the council governments in our state, because this is really the bread and butter of public policy. I mean, it is literally where policy meets the street corner, the schoolroom, the library, the cops on the beat, and so on. And I know there's been a lot of demographic change in the county, and I know that you're facing many fiscal challenges, and you're really to be congratulated where you faced some of that head-on last year. So what I wanted to do, and thank you for your kind invitation, I have my staff here and they'll introduce themselves in a minute, but a quick word about me, and of course I'm always glad to see George and Nancy. They work for me and have this compulsive do it now, but I know the entire council does because I'm familiar with your work. For me, since the last time we met, not only have I been reelected, but on December 20th, with the passing of Senator Danny Inouye, I became the full chair of the Appropriations Committee. And like you, I became another firstie, and the first woman to chair the full committee. This is an enormous honor, but a tremendous responsibility, because right now we are facing probably one of the most severe fiscal challenges and the severe governance challenges. In other words, years ago, like in the golden age, spending followed policy. In other words, policy determined spending. But right now, spending is going to be the driver of policy. Whether we do it, whether we have to minimize it, how we have to get more value for the dollar. What we're facing in the Congress, because we have inherited a set of policies over the last several years in which, when President Obama was stymied, there was the policy of the other party, particularly the Tea Party, to follow the policy of either ultimatum politics, obstruction politics, or delay. Their idea of ultimately the compromise, whenever we faced a really big problem, was to delay it into the future. Well, now in March, we have an incredible rendezvous with destiny. So coming back to me, I have a great responsibility. I chair a committee that's made up of 12 subcommittees, all of which are the important categories that fund our government: defense, transportation, and housing and urban development is another, labor, education, and health and human services, which really is very determinative in terms of this county, in terms of employment. And I could go through those. What we are already under constraints to cut the budget. So when you hear the other party saying, we need to have deep cuts, we already agreed to that. In August of 2011, in the midst of that awful debt crisis, and other than September 11th, 2001, the debt crisis was in one of our most traumatic things. On 9/11, it was an attack on us, but now we attack each other. So we gotta get past ultimatum politics and delay politics. But where we are is on March 1st, we will have something called the sequester. This was designed never to happen. It was meant to be so draconian of a threat to our economy that it would force us into a grand bargain to look at debt and deficit in a balanced way of revenue, examining mandatory spending, and yes, cuts in out-of-date or bloated programs, and also getting more value for our dollar. The kinds of things you guys are really focusing on. In other words, not only spend the dollar, but are we really getting value for that dollar? So we've been ready to do that. Your appropriators have already cut over $54 billion in the last 3 years. So, okay, and they've all been on discretionary spending. On March 1st, we're going to face this sequester, and that is $86 billion in across-the-board cuts. And I'm going to ask my staff to go into that in more detail. Now, that is just across the board, indiscriminate. Then on March 27th, if we don't deal, while we're dealing with sequester, the continuing resolution expires. So the entire funding for the federal government that has kept this operating has functioned on something called a continuing resolution. Last fall, to avoid confrontation, ultimatum, and so on going into the election, we just simply took the 2012 appropriation framework and extended it to now. So we've lived under that for 5 months. That's automatically a cut because you've held everything in space. On March 27th, that expires. If we don't deal with that, we could head to a government shutdown. So from our standpoint in Maryland, where there are now 120,000 federal employees working statewide, and these are the civilian employees, including civilian Roger who work for defense, okay? So we think of defense as military, but there's the civilian employees, like at Carter Rock, some of our great installations. And in Maryland, we have 120,000 federal employees, all doing important work, really important work. And in Montgomery County, you have about 32,000 of those. 10,000 and more at NIH, 3,000 at the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, 4,000 at FDA. I could go through the numbers. So what we're faced with now is dealing with this, but I wanted to alert you to this because I've discussed this extensively with the governor. The governor, Democrats had a retreat in Annapolis last week, and we invited the governor to hear the president in his meeting with us. This is serious. I mean, this is really serious. So let me just talk about the sequester, because you're a July 1st budget, aren't you? So yes. You're already halfway through your fiscal year. You've already budgeted what you think your money is. So, Aaron, do you want to talk about education and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Aaron Edelman. I handle economic policy and budget issues for the senator. And we've gotten estimates. Last Friday, the White House put out a good fact sheet that has nationally about how this impact will play out on some of the agencies. And
so let's go right to the agencies. Okay. And I'm going to give you a Maryland handout just for we've been able to get from Senator Harkin because you need to know OMB, as of 3 weeks ago, OMB wouldn't even give me the information. Right. They said they were working on messaging. So I've squeezed it out of them. And let's do that. So education.
Yes. So with education, it means that 13,000 fewer students would be
No,
served
go
by
to the
Title I.
percentage of the cut.
It's about it's a 5% cut for all agencies across the board for non-defense, and about 8% for defense agencies. So the Department of Ed will have a 5% cut across the board.
So, go through the so Title I,
Title I will have 13,000 fewer students served in Maryland.
let me, 5% cut in Title I. This is, okay. 5% cut in Title II. 5% cut in special ed. Friends, this drove me up the wall. I mean, then there's the Head Start where Aaron can give you the national number. This is already an unfunded federal mandate for you.
Absolutely.
It's already an unfunded federal mandate. So I would imagine the consequences of, and you have more Title I kids, am I correct demographically?
Oh, yes.
So okay, so rather than going to, 7,000 Head Start and so on, that's nationwide, just think of 5% in those three areas. Okay?
Similarly, there'll be 5% across the board for the Child Care Development Block Grants, Health and Human Services, 5% for Maternal and Child Health Block Grants, 5% for LIHEAP, 5% for Community Services Block Grant, and there'll be 5% across the board for Department of Justice programs, local justice COTS grants that help you all with your budgets. 1,000 fewer agents at FBI, and 5% fewer for disaster assistance at a time when we're dealing with the after effects of Sandy. It's indiscriminate. It's across the board. There's no thought about how the impact weighs by district or by locality. How many people are hurt by each individual program? What's outdated? What could be effects? It's just 5% across the board without thoughts of consequences.
See, it was originally 8, but because we've done other things going into this, it's at 5. But do you see, if you just go to the Department of Ed, that's like your checklist of pretty much what comes to state and local, and also what comes to the governor. So the governor and the State Board of Ed is looking at this. And then you see the special programs, okay? But whether it's special ed, it's the English programs, etc. Then when you go to Health and Human Services, and as well as FDA, which is ironically under agriculture, this is big. Aaron, do you want to talk about the impact on federal employees?
Yes, it's expected to be about
Because
up
this
to-
is going to affect your
Oh, yes.
income tax, I would imagine. So,
Oh, yeah, completely.
okay, go ahead.
The expectation is because trying to roll out just layoffs across the board would be time consuming. They couldn't get those cuts out in time. That the expectation is rolling furloughs. Expected to hear up to 22 weeks of furloughs, and the expectation is that could be as much as 1 day a week for the remainder.
Which would be a
of the year.
20% pay cut.
A
I
20%.
mean, when they say 1 day a week, everybody's kind of blasé about it.
Yeah, my friend's daughter just got a notice like that from the FDA. She's in cancer research.
What did she
20%
get, Nancy?
20% pay cut, 4 days a week. Down to 4 days a week. I'm not sure when it begins, but got a notice last week.
It would go into effect March 1st, but it takes like 60 days to go into effect.
Right.
So we have time to vitiate this.
So the furloughs would be affecting again at every agency. The FBI would be laying off workers. The NSF and NIH would be cutting back grants. You'd be seeing all the universities and researchers around the area losing the professors and students who are working on that scientific research. We'd be seeing dramatic constituent services going down. Longer delays and backlogs for constituents who need it, and you know, the tens of thousands of federal employees in Montgomery County would be losing a fifth of their pay.
You're going to be one of the hardest hit
Yes.
counties.
Yes.
You will be one of the hardest hit counties because of the clustering of federal agencies. I mean, you have something like 17 major facilities, and by major, I mean like everything from NIH, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NIST, FDA are the big ones, but then you get to like the Consumer Product Safety Agency, you know, that's 400 people. So you put it all together, you're at about 32,000 people that are about to take a substantial pay cut.
And under, you know, under a government shutdown, there's typically been that those wages get repaid, but under something like this, those wages never come back. That's just lost. That's a 20% cut to the salary for the entire year.
It's dramatic.
You want to talk about transportation, which
Yes.
I know
it's on
is
our
your
list.
obsession, and then we can talk about what's the solution here?
So my name's Bridget Hooten, and I handle infrastructure issues for the senator, and I'm here today to try to answer your transportation questions. Under sequester, the formula dollars that the senator fights for each year would be exempt from sequester. So you get the governor receives $580 million for highways and then $200 million for transit. So those funds would still be coming in. But what's not exempt is the pot of money that funds projects like the Purple Line and CCT. Our Metro dedicated funding that the senator has fought for over the last 4 years, the $150 million, would not
For
be
the new
exempt.
cars and the new...
Would not be.
Yes, that would
Whoa.
be cut. FAA would have to lay off air traffic controllers, so it may shut down our skies because of flight delays. And Amtrak would be cut. And then also the airport improvement program that does infrastructure improvements outside of outside of the airports, BWI, our general aviation airports, another pot that would be cut.
Which means Martin will have less money.
Yes.
I mean, the whole point of
Definitely.
talking about the projects outside of your area still
course.
determine your area, and of course, will affect Reagan National, Dulles, because we're all the capital region. But go back over the ones that are affected. So the formula funding for his highways will stay the same.
Yes.
But the major transit initiatives get torpedoed, right?
Yes, that's correct. They're not protected. It's in a 5% cut.
Excuse me.
So, it's really a grim picture.
So you want to ask any questions, and then I'll...
Councilman
Are
Andrews.
are there any members of the Maryland congressional delegation that support the sequester other than perhaps Representative Harris?
No, all of us are opposed to the sequester. The sequester was never meant to happen. It was to get us to the table for what the president hoped would be a grand bargain, that over a 10-year period, how we would reduce our debt by $4 trillion, which IMF and everybody says would show that we're serious, we have a plan, keep our interest rates, our bond rating, all those things, Councilman, that put us there.
Right, I appreciate your leadership because it is a mindless approach.
Councilmember Leventhal.
Senator, I worked for you in the early 1990s, and at that time, your relationships with Republicans, including on appropriations, were very, very good. I remember that you and Senator Bond alternated back and forth who ran your subcommittee at that time, and he was very different from you, very conservative, very different views about women's reproductive health and other things, and yet you and he couldn't have been better colleagues and even friends. At least that was my perception as a staffer. And I guess you're going to talk about the solution now. How has the ability to achieve collegiality and for elected officials from different parties to work together in the public interest and in the nation's interest, is there any hope for that? And you were always very, very skilled at that. I think about your relations with Senator Hutchinson and other Republicans that were superb. How can we, I know you're going to talk about what is the solution. How do we restore those kinds of personal relationships?
Well, first of all, personal relationships, I would say, during the last 3 years have been shredded. However, many of us maintain those. So, speaking of the women for a minute, there are 20 of us now, which is very exciting. 16 Democratic women, 4 Republican women. And we continue to have our regular dinners. And the whole point of it is that among ourselves we would have a zone of civility, and that we would get to know each other and take the time to see where there might be common ground. Not only as women say on women in the military, the health care, military and families, you know, the kinds of issues that human trafficking that we would work on broadly, but even on energy policy. And we differ, but but the impact of the Tea Party on the Republicans has been significant, so that the moderates are punished for being moderate, and often then are primaried. So they fear that they would face a primary. So you take a conservative like Senator Bob Bennett of Utah, an elder in the Mormon Church, fiscally conservative, a perfect gentleman, wonderful to work with, successful businessman. You actually learn from him. Or Senator Lugar, who was iconic in the field of foreign policy. They got their primaries, and they got their lunch handed to them, or in Senator Bennett's case. So there is pressure to not cooperate. There's tremendous pressure, and they're taking it from their leadership. However, elections do have consequences. And as you know, the Republicans are in the process of evaluating where they are. And quite frankly, during the campaign, President Obama was very clear on how he wanted to get us out of the fiscal crisis. He had no secret plan, nothing that he would get to after the election, you know, because people like Paul Ryan and Romney weren't listing the tax loopholes they wanted to close. The president has it. We have a binder full of loopholes. And so, but it will take them wanting to solve this. Where we are now, right this minute, is the Republican Tea Party crowd would like to, and there is this middle ground. If their leadership is ready to go, they're ready to go. And I might add also in the House. So what is it that we want? We want a balanced solution. So for not only sequester, but under what we passed in August of 2011, the sequester will happen every year for 9 years. So this isn't like a one-time thing, like, oh, get it behind us, and then we can go on. We'll get it behind us, but unless we truly grow for the grand bargain the president really wants, and I support enthusiastically, we're going to be in this jackpot every year, and you can't manage that way. You know, Bill Gates said the other day on TV that any CEO trying to manage with a 90-day budget would be out the door. So what is it that we want? We want a balanced solution that includes revenue, that means looking at mandatory spending, and that means looking at additional cuts. And it does mean looking at additional cuts in both defense and also in the domestics. So we're not taking cuts out. We're not using the total thing. And defense says they're ready. They have ideas. Domestic has ideas as well. But we have to look at additional revenue. So the annual appropriations is $1.2 trillion. So that's what we spend. The revenue now with the president and the taxes and so on gets us to like $600 billion. So we're short. So we have to come up with more. And we do have ways of doing that. And then it also means looking at saving other money, particularly in Medicaid and Medicare. But that does not necessarily mean, and in fact, I'm opposed to raising the age. There are other ways of getting at it. Does that tell you where we want to go? But how to get there goes to the heart of what George was asking.
Councilmember Leonard.
how close is that to the plan that the president was dealing with the speaker, the grand bargain, the 4 trillion? I mean, isn't that really the same conversation that they've been having for several years now? I mean, he couldn't sell to his Tea Party, but is that dynamic changed so that that kind of grand bargain is possible?
It is, and what the president put on the table, we might not ever do again. The president was really ready to look at entitlements.
He was.
You know, we had that Simpson-Bowles Commission.
Yep.
Some of it I agree with, some not, but at least concrete points of discussion. And by the way, I just feel that Chris Van Hollen's done a fantastic job as chairman of the Budget Committee. I mean, he really has been going toe to toe to toe, and I'm really very proud of him. But the answer is we gave them something. They couldn't take yes for an answer, Phil. They couldn't take, Roger, they couldn't take yes for an answer. And now we're back to exactly the same issues. That's what I meant. Ultimatum delay, ultimatum delay. We can't now delay. This is it. This is it.
Well, I hope at this moment it does change the dynamics of we get where we
Well,
need to be.
watch the State of the Union tomorrow, and you'll hear the president's positions and how dire this is. But tell me, from your perspective, just what I said, what would it mean to all of you? Because as I go back to advocate for you, I'd love to know, like, your reaction and how you see it in terms of real kind of boots on the ground impact.
I think in education, when I was looking at the cuts here and the way it comes to us, I mean, one of our challenges, you alluded to a little bit, is the notion that even though we have such a great county and it's, you know, fortunate and affluent, et cetera, we also have this growing number of children who are affected by poverty, you know, large numbers of children who receive English as second language instruction, a lot of Title I schools, and it keeps growing. And so that particular piece, in terms of the cuts there, kind of come down from education. It's real. It's a real impact for us, disproportionately, because we have, of course, the largest share in Maryland of students that have those types of needs. So that immediately jumps out to me, but I know that there are a lot of issues in HHS as well. Councilmember Leventhal chairs the HHS committee.
Maybe we just go around
Yes,
the room.
yes.
Well, certainly in terms of the increased need for services, it's enormous, but I would also talk about the business climate. There's ancillary effects. If family income is down because we have so many federal employees, then that means grocery store receipts are down, clothing store receipts are down, personal services, accountants, child care centers. So all of the small businesses that are just beginning to feel like the recession maybe is ending and just starting to feel some confidence. Home foreclosures beginning to decline. These kinds of indicators of whether we're stable. There's still a lot of anxiety out there, and this uncertainty and anxiety just adds to that. So we're trying to build a stable environment to make communities like Wheaton or Bethesda, Silver Spring, an exciting and interesting place to go. That's all discretionary income. People don't have to go out. They don't have to go shopping. And where if they're federal employees or if they're contractors to the federal government, which is huge for us, the
It will
uncertainty
impact,
means...
in other words, the contractors are treated,
Another.
I mean, they'll get their cut too.
Precisely.
Yes.
So it has gigantic spillover effects in terms of our whole economic climate.
Right?
Yeah, well, Senator, first, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your advocacy on behalf of Maryland, because I think that's extremely important at a time like this, and a person like you who's got the experience is going to be of the utmost importance when it comes to making these really tough decisions. But let me just tell you, representing an area that's kind of the up-and-coming place in Montgomery County, you know, Germantown is relatively new, as is Clarksburg, and, you know, in Germantown, where we have the Department of Energy and a lot of government contractors that are in that area, that whole air park that surrounds the Department of Energy is very dependent upon government spending. And I mean, I think about business owners like Will Teal of One Source Solutions, who has a $1 billion contract with the Department of Energy. But he helps to employ a lot of those others that are under him. Those kinds of impacts have a direct correlation to what George was talking about in terms of discretionary spending. Then you look at from a transportation angle, so I'll take it from economic development to transportation. You know, we in that area, Germantown, if incorporated, would be the second largest city in the state of Maryland, only second to Baltimore City.
Is that right? How many?
90,000 people as a result of the last census, and I guarantee at this point it's probably 100,000. So all those people in Germantown with no access to mass transit. And so the Corridor City Transitway is an extremely important way in which not only do we connect Germantown, but also Clarksburg, which is an up-and-coming area as well, to mass transit. You know, extremely important when you look at the traffic that's going on 270, which also has then an economic development impact from Frederick all the way down. And so those are the kinds of things that we're talking about are really important when you're looking at the Washington metropolitan region, where you're talking about bioscience and the biotechnology corridor and all the money that's being invested when it comes to Johns Hopkins and making sure that we have, you know, Science City. All of those things are dependent upon the Corridor City Transitway.
Right.
So if we don't have that transportation money,
So it'd
you're
be,
talking about.
well, it's the impact on the Shady Grove,
That's
which
right.
is
Right.
an
That's right.
incredible development.
That's exactly
And
right.
then the new life science up by White Oak.
Exactly. On all of those, you know, we have Kaigen that's out there in Germantown as well that just invested a
Big
huge
time.
amount of money. And that's a global company that's got its headquarters right here in Montgomery County, in my district, right around the corner from my house. But again, they're making those investments and assuming that we're also going to follow with those transportation dollars and making sure that, you know, their employees can get to and from. Those are the kinds of stories that we'd like for you to share, to talk about how we're stalwarting ourselves as putting Maryland forward when it comes to being a biotechnology leader, you know, and saying that, look, this can't happen, and we can't put ourselves, our firm foot forward if we don't have that support.
So I'm just astounded that the Republicans and the pro-business attitude they have doesn't get the value of investment in infrastructure in any way, shape, or form. And you can never run a business with the attitude that they take toward this country. I just find that amazing in this day and age. I don't think there are any good options on this budget because you're talking about cuts no matter what. And I guess it matters the depth of the cuts is certainly going to make a difference, but it seems to me that any of the cuts are going to mean giving up some things we probably should be doing, and it's not an easy thing to make cuts on kind of a sword hanging over your head as opposed to having the time to step back and rationally say, how would I go about reshaping this? If I had to reshape it with less money, how would I do it? Across the board cuts aren't the way to do it, and I worry that we're going to continue to lose really important things. I have a friend who works in the National Academy of Sciences. They can't get funding for any projects. They from the private sector or from the government because nobody has any level of certainty that there's going to be money there. And so nobody wants, they do fundamental research that, the government depends on, the private sector depends on. It's like they watched everything in the last 6 months kind of grind to a halt, wondering what's going to be next. Strange way to run a country.
Yeah. Well, I think the uncertainty created by governing by continuing resolution or sequestration is terrible for the economy. I am reassured that all I know about you is that you'll bring a really thoughtful approach to managing the budget.
And noisy.
Noisy.
I mean,
well, that too.
I'll be thoughtful, but I'm going to be noisy.
That's needed sometimes. But the across-the-boards approach is such a mindless approach that there are a lot of things on here that don't make sense, such as not answering crisis calls. If there's any call you would answer a call from someone who's in crisis for all the things that it would bring on if you don't. So I hope that there will be some way, assuming that there are cuts, and I agree there need to be trims and programs, that it's done really thoughtfully and not the way that it seems to be on the verge of being implemented if the sequestration goes into effect on March 1st.
Well, Nancy?
Well, I want to say we're really just so honored that you've been placed in the position that you're in now. You're one of the most important people in this country, and so we're just delighted that it is you, because you're the one who will make things happen. We know that. This is real. Last week, my daughter's boyfriend's office in DOE, they fired all the contractors, and they told all the government employees they're going to have to reapply for jobs somewhere.
What is COE?
Not sure, DOE,
Oh,
Department of
DOE.
Energy. As I said, my friend, last week I heard about my friend Deanne's daughter, who's a cancer researcher at FDA, who's got a mortgage and a new baby, and she just heard about her 20% pay cut and reduced work week. The vacancy rates here in Montgomery County are affected by all these decisions, and those numbers are only going up.
You mean in the commercial real
In the
estate area?
commercial real estate agent world, because of course we have so many federal contractors, and the federal agencies themselves are pulling back in their space needs. What we know is that the government can't function this way, and they know it too. And we're really seeing a government meltdown in advance because they cannot plan.
You mean among the federal managers?
Yes, they cannot plan, they cannot issue contracts, they don't know where they're going. And it's a terrible message to the community at large and to the world, frankly, that this nation, this great nation, cannot manage its own finances. We go around lecturing other countries, and look at us.
Well, it's
My
not only
colleagues have
managing our
addressed all the
finances.
other kinds of things, but it is just breathtaking that we find ourselves in this place over and over again. So I know with you at the helm here, there is some hope, maybe, that maybe we can find a way.
Well,
Let me
it's
just
not
add one
only
more.
the issue around finance. I mean, finance is about math, and it's money in, money out, and making sure, as the president said, everybody pays their fair share, everybody gets a fair shake in our society, and also including the taxpayer. I think all of us have a greater sense of frugality than we might have had, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And I think we're all looking at these things with intellectual rigor, a real scrutiny, a skepticism, hesitation on some new programs. And I think we've got that message. That part of the Tea Party was good. It was a wake-up call. We've all got that. But now we have to actually govern. We have to really be willing to give and to take.
Let me just add one more. When the President Navarro and I went to New York last year to meet with the bond rating agencies,
Oh, right.
Moody's made it absolutely real clear, and has said it for a number of years now, that our AAA bond rating is linked to the federal government's capacity to continue in an appropriate manner. And if the sequester comes, our county, notwithstanding all the things we have done to take care of our own business,
And be prudent.
and be prudent, and we're proud of the work we've done to do that in difficult times. But for us now to be downgraded, lose our AAA bond rating, if you will, because the federal government can't do its job, is particularly galling and will cost our county in real terms. As you know, I mean, when you lose your AAA bond rating, it costs you more to borrow money. Well, we are out there borrowing money. So it will have a very real effect on our capacity to fund schools and other things that are so important to us. That's just one example of a very
That's a big example.
It's a big example.
I mean,
Really?
because what you all have, what we don't have, is a capital budget. But that's the way we all manage our lives. We take out loans for things that will be an asset into the future. A student loan, the two biggest, of course, are our student loan and our asset loan, our mortgage. So, but it's meant you borrow because it's going to have value to you now and value to you in the future. So I get your capital budget would just be blown to hell. I mean, if you lose your bond rating and interest, we're living in kind of a never land where we have these fiscal challenges, but at this minute, not artificially low interest rates. But what did they tell you? If we continue to hit our speed bumps or our indeterminate future, or what?
Moody's has made explicit, we are on negative watch now,
I'm going to get this away.
not because of, again, our actions.
So you're on a negative
We're
watch?
on a negative watch now, and they've made it clear, I think, that if sequestration comes through in the same way that you were very explicit as to our county is among those that will be hurt the most,
Right. Well,
They
see, what
that
I
too.
worry about is if the federal government sneezes, Montgomery County gets pneumonia.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I'm here, that's why after I chat with our conversation, I'm gonna be talking to Ike. You know, the governor is more than aware of this as they look at it, because we have real transportation issues. However, if we could crack the transportation issues, because you see, while we're looking at spending, revenue versus spending, really, we have to also look at jobs. So you can't talk about jobs in our country unless you talk about innovation.
Yes.
This county is the incubator of American innovation. Life sciences that you've all talked about, that's one of our signature issues. Information technology on the rise. Then you have the National Institutes of Standards, which takes products, and by creating the standards, the American standard, not the Chinese standard, we then can make products to go out and sell to the world. So I get it, but I didn't realize that you all were on a negative watch list, starting with our near default. Is that what happened
Yes,
to you?
solely as a function, again, not of our issues, but of the federal government's issues.
And there was a conversation also during those meetings where we, obviously we didn't want to emphasize that too much.
No, but
it
you
was-
see, you've taken demonstrable,
Absolutely.
prudent steps to manage and discipline your own fiscal affairs. And then here we are. So if these employees are hit, the contractors are hit, that has to affect the income tax, that has to affect the piggyback tax, because this again will be a statewide phenomenon. Prince George's, the whole corridor
Sales
really
tax.
gets whacked.
Absolutely. And they recognized the fact that we had been so nimble and just, very flexible in addressing structural deficit issues. This is why we were able to receive the rating. Nonetheless, the conversation was had, and of course, all we could pretty much say was, we hope that you develop standards that are unique to jurisdictions such as ours, so that we're not just all evaluated under this lens, but, that's a long shot. We don't think that's going to happen, and yeah, it is a major concern.
Well, I would hope that the National Association of Counties would speak up. I know the mayors have been in town. They've spoken somewhat about this. Their primary focus right this minute was to come in to talk about gun control. Know that I support the Feinstein assault weapon ban, the limitation on these 100 rounds of ammo and so on, and increased help in mental health. And just to give you an example of mental health, we held a hearing on mental health issues under Senator Harkin's committee. And I asked the head of the National Institutes of Mental Health, who was giving the kind of latest update in research, what is the impact of sequester on them? Well, he talked about the furloughs, the fact that young researchers, the breakthrough, the out of the backs, the new thinking, won't get it, those who already have careers. But he said, we have one test that we're developing that we will not fund, and here's this test. It's a predictor of early detection for adult onset schizophrenia. We have a phenomenon in mental health, particularly where there are young males, but not limited to, develop schizophrenia in their late teens and in their early 20s. This test would not be to marginalize or whatever, but if you know there's just like diabetes, if we look at mental health parity, you would know that if there's this propensity, then you get in right there when they're 8, not when they're 18 and you're working and there'll be new drugs and so on. And as you know, Aurora, Newtown, some of the latest, most violent assaults have been there. So, that's one example. Then the other example is something that I've worked on with both Ike and the predecessors back and in Prince George's, is the issue of gang violence. We have an issue of gang violence in the metropolitan area. And, look at, we know about white suburban shootings, but then there is this gang-on-gang shooting, where Mrs. Obama went to the funeral in Chicago. We look at what the crime rate we have in Baltimore. So anyway, the mayors are talking about that. I'm into that. But it all goes to, and I said this to the president, we can have the best gun control legislation in the world, but if we can't implement the background checks, if we can't do all of that, it's going to be a hollow opportunity. So, I'm gonna really fight for you, but we need our local governments speaking out. The mayor system, I would really hope that within the corridor, those that are executive governed, because we have the commissioner system and the executive and Baltimore mayor system, that particularly those of you with the executive council system, you let us know. Really, not only urge us to come to a solution, but really some of the examples about the tremendous impact on our economy and so on. And it would be a big help. But the national groups have to get involved in this, because those that have been speaking out have been defense. I'm not knocking that, because defense will take a hit. They will. But HHS will take a $6 billion hit nationwide. Okay? Justice will take a $3 billion hit. And I could go on about it. So, anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate so much those comments, and I think that piggybacking on what my colleague Florine said, it is very true that when we think of defense and foreign policy, this is a serious issue, the way that we are perceived around the world, given this issue of just not acting and, seemingly weak in some respects. And I think it's a serious thing to consider as we're also trying to solidify our stance around the world as well as we recover from this economic downturn. So,
and some of the
we
new really
appreciate
strong social issues.
Yeah.
But listen, before I wrap up, are there other issues you'd like to raise that are happening nationally or whatever?
Well, I know that the transportation is always on our minds, and we sometimes have difficulty getting the rest of the state to appreciate our difficulty here, but 1 out of every 6 Marylanders lives in Montgomery County. And so we just are facing a great disconnect between our real need and our enormous difficulty of people getting from home to work and what the rest of the state confronts. And so we just continue to appeal to you to work on infrastructure as you said you would. The other thing, well, first of all, I want to praise your staff. We really enjoy working with Courtney, and your Washington staff was always very responsive and helpful when we raise issues with them. I'm going to be reaching out to Walter Reed and also USIS, because I believe that there is a significant asset there that we can coordinate better with, both in terms of volunteer docs making themselves available and the facility. It's my understanding that as the wars are drawing down, there's actually capacity for training with respect to rehab and trauma care. So I'll be working with your staff on this, but I think that that's an asset that we at the local level, our hospitals and our healthcare systems can take better advantage of, and I think there's an opportunity to work with your office and our other congressional delegations there.
Yes, I think it'd be great, other than the traffic jam with everybody. I think 1 out of 6 Marylanders are at those stoplights, too. No, but seriously, it is. The war is going to wind down. Our troops will be home by 2014, and that's what they call the Overseas Contingency Fund, and that's to the tune of $187 billion a year. So that will be money coming home. There are those who want to keep a presence in Afghanistan while we're closing Social Security offices here. Mm-hmm. So, and I also believe we need an infrastructure bank. Mm-hmm. I believe that transportation, one, would be such a driver for jobs in a very positive sense, in which you've outlined here, the Carter Cities Project, Craig, and the Purple Line, which we've talked about forever, that you have a mass transit plan. Mm-hmm. A lot of places don't have a mass transit plan. And an infrastructure bank would go a long way to doing this. The idea that some of us have floated is that, we have money that American corporations have made overseas, and they've made it legitimately, GE, Google, etc. If they bring it back home, they pay a 25% tax. They don't want to pay that. They want to pay a lower rate. They did that under George Bush, and it was, don't worry, honey, let us bring it back home and we'll create jobs. They didn't. They created dividends and more executive compensation. So we're not going to do that again. But what Schumer, myself, and others are talking about is to give a reduced rate if you put it in an infrastructure bank and even earn a return, almost like municipal bonds kind of thing, but you've got to give us the money for 10 years. And then it would be like a revolving fund, but you bring the money home and it would be designated. You just couldn't say, I'm bringing it home. You put it there. We estimate that we could initially, in the first year alone, come up with like $50 billion. And this would be a big start on these big projects. These big projects that are lining up, that are truly ready to go. I know the environmental statement on purple will be done, I think, this spring. Am I correct? So, this is what I mean by innovation, where we bring in the private sector, we become partners, but we're not giving selling rights. It won't be, the Bloomingdale, or the Macy's, whatever. But I don't care about that. So, a word about immigration reform. Darren, did you want to talk about immigration reform, or?
It's something that is developing. Where there's a core group of bipartisan senators that are working on the basis for a deal. The senators' primary principles on this are that we need to secure our borders, that we need to protect American jobs, and that we need to reward those that play by the rules. And so that's what the senators been at in this debate, and it should be moving forward this spring.
I'm actually more optimistic about immigration reform than gun control.
Yeah.
I think there is, with gun control, there's a lot of controversy. But I do think we'll get to background checks and something. And I'm for the whole program. But I think on immigration reform, what you have is far more grassroots support than the naysayers would like to admit. You have everything from business to the economy to whatever. And we have strong bipartisan, and I think growing bipartisan support. And the other aspect of elections having consequences, the role of not both the Latino community, but when you look at the demography of the election, the African American community voted for President Obama by something like 95 to 98%. The second largest turnout, percentage to population, was the Asian American community. Many here legal, but terrible problems with family unification. The waiting 23 years to get your sister here, Your mother's already passed on. Along with then the Latino community, this is there. And even some of our most rigid Republican or Tea Party crowds are saying you cannot have people living in the shadows. So, and I think the results of the DREAM Act here, both the DREAM Act and marriage equality in the last election, was a triumph of tolerance. It was not only a triumph of the individual issue, but it essentially said that the history of Maryland is there. Do we have to defend our borders? Yes. And not only against illegal people, but also against illegal weapons, the trafficking, the vile practice of trafficking in people as if they were commodities, and so on. So But I believe that there's strong support. We do have to come up with border control, fine, a path to legal status, and there might be two paths, that for the adults who came illegally, so there's not like an amnesty, might be a path to legal status, but their path for their children to be American citizens. So there's lots of permutation, and I really do think that by the end of this calendar year, we could do immigration reform. And I think it would be a big triumph, and then have made a significant advance on the issue of gun control.
Well, we wish you the very best of luck.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much for everything that you have done and you will continue to do.
Well,
And,
you're more than
we
welcome.
will-
I don't know if you all got this announcement, but Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service won a $1 million federal funding grant. Did you all see that?
Yes.
You know, which is terrific. And we don't want to see these cuts keep coming. So, anything else, though, that you wanted to cover?
Senator, if I could, one more,
Sure.
to thank you for, again, your support for transportation, and let me say something that might be a little impolitic.
No.
I would ask you to use your influence for good governor with respect to transportation funding, because I'm actually more confident of the federal government's capacity to fund the Purple Line than I am of our state's capacity to meet its obligations in the Purple Line. And anything you could do to encourage the governor to make this a priority of his now. It won't happen without his leadership. We need his leadership desperately on this issue.
Well, we know transportation is one of the biggest issues
We do, but,
in Annapolis.
and we know that President Miller has a plan, but we haven't really heard from the governor in a way in which we need to hear from the governor.
Well, I imagine you're going to hear something.
I hope so.
And Obama would say, and Hallie would say, I'm waiting to hear from Obama. And then Obama would say, well, ask Mikulski.
That's why I'm asking you to help us with this other guy.
Senator, I just want to put in a good word about the Federal Office of Personnel Management. They've adopted some policies in the last year that really they've been implementing. John Berry, who's a Montgomery County native, has done a good job. And in response to the snowstorm 2 years ago that paralyzed the region in the middle afternoon, people had 18-hour commutes, the federal government, the OPM, looked at their employee release policies and they made some significant changes, because what happened that day was basically everybody left at the same time.
Yeah, it's that 1 out of 6 people at the same traffic.
At once.
You know, I was one of those.
So now they've adopted a policy, basically leave no later than this time or stay put until we say the transportation network is adequate so you can get home. And they've really changed their approach, and it's made it, I think it's already making it.
Well, that's good to hear. He's been a very hard worker and a breath of fresh air. I mean, you actually get somebody who wants to sit down and solve problems.
Yeah.
But also, I think being from our region,
Mm-hmm.
rather than wanting to be a personnel director from 35,000 feet
Right.
up,
Yeah, he
you
understands.
know, he really, I mean, he knows it. And this capital region is really something. Which also, to conclude, first of all, thanks for giving us John Delaney. You know, it's just great to work with him. You know, he brings a lot of different set of skills, and we're already working together. From my perspective, of course, it means, you know, 9 out of 10 of the delegation are Democrats. And also for me, it gives me a partner, not only in addition to the Montgomery County 270 corridor, but also to Western Maryland. As your senator, you know, of course, we see the growing nature of Frederick, the whole extension of the corridor, which goes to transportation. But you know, Western Maryland and my mountain counties are really hard scrabble, and they're on the outer banks of Appalachia. And it's an area where, you know, I could really work with Beverly Byron. And it's not that I couldn't work with Roscoe Bartlett. He was a very pleasant person, etc. But there was no there where we could, where Ben Cardin and I and so on, because we are senators and we have statewide responsibility, we count on our council people and to tell us, like we've done here today, and we count on our congressional representatives, because they're right there in a way, far more, with far more depth and far more regularity than we can be. And having Delaney will be a big help here, but he'll also be a big partner to help us really, truly in our state to try to lift all boats. So, anyway, thank you for that. And thank you, because we now have Tim Kaine in the Virginia delegation, and Senator Warner, Senator Kaine, Cardin, and I are very tight in terms of seeing this as the capital region. And if we can crack this fiscal code here, I'd like to talk with you, really, at another time about the capital region issues.
Absolutely.
One, the security of the grid from both not only cyber attack, but snowstorms. You know, all of these kinds of things. How we need to reward the private sector, but also hold them accountable for the reliability and the resiliency of the grid, because I know you faced enormous challenges. And then some of the other things where really we have a corridor here from the North Capital Region to, say, Aberdeen, that is like no other in the nation in terms of truly being the incubator of innovation for our country. So, well, great being
Thank
with
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Take my little clicker. Now, before I go, Courtney, you want to?
Courtney's doing a wonderful job in representing you, Senator, on many things.
Well, Sally, you
Yes.
want to say hello and introduce, make sure.
I'm Sally Wingo. I think I know a lot of you in here. I'm state administrator, but on a day-to-day basis, you see Courtney as the senator's ears and eyes in your county.
Lean on me, reach out for anything. I see a lot of you all of the time, so, but.
Courtney's my catcher's mitt. So that means, you know, all these things so that you all know, and Nancy and Georgia and all of you know how that works. That way, you've got a one-stop shop. And I might add also, before I go, is constituent service. Listen, I know that's our bread and butter. And a lot of people don't know the difference between a council person, a United States senator, a state senator. But if you get any calls related to federal issues, the Social Security check that got lost, the veterans benefit where there's still the backlog, you know, give us a call. You have Ben and I, and you have John, Chris, and now John Sarbanes. So you've got two Johns, a Chris, a Barb, a Ben.
Everybody wants a piece.
Yeah. Okay. 1 out of 6.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so much.